Hey guys, welcome to Princeton's English channel, and also welcome another motivational video. Our today's video is about how to improve communication skills. So guys, if you are new in my channel, please make sure to subscribe my channel. No more talk less, start our today's video. A new beginning. The applause from that New York stage faded, but Ethan Cole's life was just beginning. For the first time, he walked out of a room not haunted by silence, but filled with purpose. His viral speech had changed more than his confidence. It changed how he saw himself. The boy who once feared his own voice had become someone people wanted to listen to. And yet, deep inside, Ethan knew this was not the end of his journey. It was only the start. Because communication wasn't just about standing on a stage. It was about connecting with people, with ideas, with the world. And Ethan still had much to learn. Back to reality. After graduation, Ethan moved back to Chicago, his hometown. He rented a tiny studio apartment overlooking the city, lights cracked walls, an old desk, and a vision board pinned with dreams. His days were filled with uncertainty. He had no job lined up, no steady income, and no plan except one: to build something meaningful with his voice. He started giving free talks at community centers, schools, and small events. Sometimes only 5 people showed up, sometimes 20, and sometimes no one at all. But Ethan kept showing up anyway. He believed in consistency more than crowds, because every time he spoke, he felt alive, connected, real. The mentor, one evening after finishing a talk at a small business meetup in downtown Chicago, an elderly man approached him. He wore a gray suit, a kind smile, and carried an old leather notebook. "Son," the man said, "you have something special, not just your words, but your honesty. But your message, it lacks depth. You speak to people, not with them." Ethan was surprised. "Sir, what do you mean?" The man smiled again. "I'm David Harrington. I used to teach communication at Northwestern. Now I just mentor a few dreamers like you. If you're willing to learn, I'll help you see what real communication means." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir, I'd love to learn." That night began one of the most important relationships of Ethan's life. Learning beyond words. Every morning, Ethan met David at a small cafe near Lake Michigan. David always arrived early, reading a newspaper and sipping black coffee. Their sessions were less like lessons and more like awakenings. "Ethan," David said one morning, "communication isn't about performance, it's about presence. You can memorize 1,000 words, but if your heart isn't in them, people won't feel a thing." He handed Ethan a blank notebook. "From today, write down everything you feel when you speak, not what you say. Write the fear, the excitement, the hesitation, the energy. Learn your own emotions before you learn others." Ethan followed his mentor's advice. He wrote daily pages filled with self-doubt, ambition, anger, joy, hope. And slowly he began to understand great communication isn't built from perfect sentences. It's born from self-awareness. Breaking the shell. A few weeks later, David pushed Ethan into something terrifying. "There's a storytelling event this Saturday," he said, "and you're signing up." Ethan's eyes widened. "A storytelling event? I've never done that." "That's the point. You've learned how to speak from your mind. Now learn to speak from your soul." The event was called Voices of Chicago. Ordinary people, artists, teachers, firefighters, and students gathered to share real-life stories. When Ethan took the stage, he looked around at the dimly lit room filled with strangers. For a moment, fear tried to creep in again. But this time, he didn't fight it. He accepted it, and he spoke. Not about success, not about techniques. He told a story about the first time he froze on stage, about the humiliation that started his journey. He talked about silence, about fear, about the long road to self-acceptance. His voice cracked midway. Tears rolled down his face. But he didn't stop. When he finished, the room was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom, but the kind that comes from connection. Then the applause began slow, steady, rising into thunder. People stood clapping, some wiping their eyes. A young woman walked up to him afterward and said, "You just told my story." That night, Ethan learned something his mentor had tried to teach him all along. The most powerful speeches aren't spoken, they're felt. The stranger one evening, Ethan sat in the cafe waiting for David, but instead a woman approached him. She was in her late 20s wearing a denim jacket, holding a notebook filled with notes. "Are you Ethan Cole?" she asked. "Yes." "I saw your talk at Voices of Chicago. I'm Maya. I work for a nonprofit that helps students develop communication and confidence. We could really use someone like you to mentor them." Ethan smiled. "I'm not sure I'm a teacher yet." "Maybe not," Maya replied, "but you're a storyteller, and kids don't need perfect teachers. They need real ones." That moment planted a seed that would grow into something far bigger than he imagined. The school program. Maya introduced Ethan to Riverdale High, a struggling public school on Chicago's South Side. Many of the students came from difficult backgrounds, broken families, poverty, and low confidence. Ethan started volunteering twice a week, teaching students how to express themselves not through perfect English or grammar, but through stories. The first few classes were rough. The kids barely listened. They mocked him, scrolled on their phones, or laughed when someone stuttered. But Ethan didn't give up. He started sharing his own embarrassing moments, his failures, his mistakes, his fears. He told them how he used to freeze when someone asked him to introduce himself. Slowly, the walls began to crack. A few kids started speaking up, then more. One day, a shy girl named Tasha stood up and told the class about losing her brother. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. When she finished, the entire room clapped for her. After class, she whispered to Ethan, "That's the first time I ever talked about it." That night, Ethan cried, not because he was sad, but because he finally realized what communication really meant. Giving others the courage to speak when they can't find their own voice. The setback. Months later, Ethan received an invitation to speak at a national education conference in Washington, D.C. It was his biggest opportunity, yet educators, leaders, and media would all be there. He prepared for weeks. But on the day of the event, something unexpected happened. Just before he went on stage, he received a call from Maya. Her voice was shaking. "Ethan, David collapsed this morning. He's in the hospital." Ethan froze. His mentor, his guide, his second father was in danger. He looked at the crowded auditorium, then at his phone. His heart was torn between duty and emotion. After a moment, he handed the mic to the event organizer and said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this today." He flew back to Chicago that night, the hospital room. David was lying weak in a hospital bed, tubes running from his arms. When Ethan entered, David opened his eyes and smiled faintly. "You're supposed to be in D.C., he whispered. Ethan held his hand. "I couldn't go without you." David chuckled softly. "Then I've taught you well." Tears rolled down Ethan's face. "You taught me everything." "No, son," David said. "You learned everything yourself. I just pointed you toward your own voice." Ethan nodded, speechless. David continued, his voice fading. "Promise me one thing. Don't stop speaking. Don't stop helping others find their voice. That's your gift, Ethan. Use it." Ethan promised. 2 days later, David passed away. A voice for others. The loss shattered Ethan. For weeks, he didn't speak at all. His notebooks remained closed, his phone silent. Until one day Maya visited him. She said softly, "David wouldn't want silence to win again." Those words pierced through the fog of grief. That night, Ethan opened his notebook, the one David had given him years ago. Inside, on the very last page, he had written, "The world doesn't need more perfect speakers. It needs more honest ones." Ethan wept, and then he knew what he had to do next, a new mission. He launched a program called Voices Rising, inspired by his students at Riverdale and his mentor David. It was a communication and confidence initiative aimed at helping underprivileged youth across America. He began traveling from city to city, from Chicago to Detroit, from Dallas to Los Angeles, holding free workshops, speaking at schools, and training young people to express themselves. He taught them how to tell their stories, how to own their voice, how to face the fear that keeps millions silent. And every time a shy student stood up and spoke, Ethan saw a reflection of his younger self. He realized that improving communication skills wasn't just a personal journey, it was a social mission, a movement to help others find power in their words. The road trip, the launch of Voices Rising, changed Ethan's life again this time, in ways he hadn't expected. The project started small, a few schools, a few workshops, a few dozen students. But word spread. Teachers began emailing him, parents wrote letters, and local journalists featured his story. Soon, Ethan found himself traveling across the country, speaking in gyms, classrooms, libraries, and even community centers in small towns most people never heard of. He traveled light, one suitcase, one microphone, one mission: help people communicate with confidence and heart. From Detroit to Atlanta, Dallas to Seattle, every place told a different story, and every face reminded him why he started. But as the miles added up, so did the exhaustion. Burnout. It was somewhere in Phoenix, Arizona, when Ethan hit his first wall. He had spoken at 3 schools that week, hours of driving under the desert sun, little sleep, and endless smiles. After one session, he collapsed into a hotel chair, drained, staring blankly at the ceiling fan. He whispered to himself, "I'm giving my voice to everyone, but I can barely hear my own anymore." His phone buzzed. It was Maya. "Ethan, you okay?" He hesitated. "Yeah, just tired." She paused. "You sound more than tired." There was silence. Then Ethan said quietly, "I don't know if I'm helping anyone anymore. It feels like I'm just talking." Maya replied gently, "You can't pour from an empty cup, Ethan. Take time for yourself. You teach people to express what they feel. Maybe it's time you practice that too." That night, Ethan lay awake, realizing something he had ignored for months. He had learned to communicate with the world, but forgotten to communicate with himself, the retreat. A few days later, he drove north to Colorado, where a communication coach named Elena Rivera ran a retreat for speakers and leaders. When he arrived, Elena greeted him warmly, a calm woman with kind eyes and a quiet strength. "You're Ethan Cole," she said. "I've watched your talks online. You've built something beautiful." "Thank you," he replied. "But lately it doesn't feel beautiful. It feels empty." Elena nodded knowingly. "Then you are ready to grow again." She introduced him to her small group of attendees, entrepreneurs, teachers, counselors, all there to rediscover their voice. Over the next few days, Ethan learned exercises that went far beyond public speaking. They practiced listening. They sat in silence, shared personal fears, wrote letters to their younger selves, and told stories that made them cry. One night during a campfire session, Elena asked everyone a question. "When was the last time you said something you truly meant without rehearsing it, without trying to sound smart, just felt it?" Ethan thought for a moment. Then he whispered, "Maybe the last time I spoke to my mentor before he died." Elena looked at him gently. "Then speak to him again in your heart. That's where real communication starts." For the first time in months, Ethan let himself grieve properly. He cried for David, for the pressure, for the exhaustion of trying to always inspire others while silently battling his own doubts. When the retreat ended, he felt lighter. Not stronger, but more human. Rediscovery. Back in Chicago, Ethan decided to take a short break from traveling. He began journaling again, not about speeches or lessons, but about moments: the laughter of a student, the silence before a crowd clapped, the scent of coffee before a talk. He realized that communication wasn't about words, it was about presence. being in the moment, not performing it. During this time, he also reconnected with Maya. They met one evening at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. She smiled across the table. "So, Mr. Voice of America, how's the mission?" He laughed. "Still learning how to listen." Her eyes softened. That's the secret, isn't it? Great communicators aren't great because they talk well. They're great because they listen deeply. He nodded. "You're right. I used to think communication was about inspiring others. Now I think it's about understanding them." Maya leaned forward. "Maybe you should write about it. Your next project could be a book." Ethan smiled, half joking. Who would read a book about a guy who couldn't talk? Maya laughed. "Millions, because that's most of us." The book. And so he started writing slowly, clumsily, honestly. The book wasn't about public speaking tricks or body language. It was about fear, silence, vulnerability, and the courage to express truth. He titled it Speak Human. He poured his entire journey into those pages, from the trembling high schooler who couldn't speak a sentence to the man who taught kids to share their stories. He wrote about David, about Maya, about the kids at Riverdale High, and about the nights when words refused to come. Months later, he sent the manuscript to a few publishers. Most didn't reply. Some politely declined. Until one morning, he received an email from Harper and Weston, a New York publishing house. They loved it. New York again. When Ethan arrived in New York for the book signing, memories flooded back, the same city where his transformation had begun. The event was held at a small bookstore in Manhattan. Dozens of people came, teachers, parents, students, and even strangers who said his videos had changed their lives. During the Q&A session, a young man stood up and asked, "Ethan, how do I stop being afraid of speaking? I feel like people judge me the second I open my mouth." Ethan paused, smiled, and said, "I used to think confidence meant not being scared, but I've learned that confidence is being scared and speaking anyway. Fear doesn't disappear. You just stop letting it control your story." The crowd nodded in quiet agreement. After the event, as people lined up for autographs, Ethan noticed a familiar face, an elderly woman with kind eyes. She handed him the book to sign and whispered, "Your mentor David once taught my class years ago. He'd be proud of you." Ethan froze, tears stinging his eyes. He looked up and smiled. "He already is, through people like you." The invitation. Weeks after his book release, Ethan received an invitation that made his heart race. It was from the White House Office of Education Initiatives. They wanted him to deliver a keynote speech on youth communication programs across America. It was the biggest stage he could imagine, not for fame, but for impact. But this time the pressure was different. He wasn't nervous because of fear, he was nervous because of meaning. He knew this wasn't just another speech. It was a moment to honor every person who helped him: David, Maya, his students, and everyone who ever struggled to speak. Night before the event, Ethan stayed in a Washington hotel room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He practiced his speech one last time, but something felt off. The words sounded rehearsed, too perfect, too polished. He remembered David's voice. "You can memorize words, but you can't memorize truth." So he tore up the paper. He decided to speak from memory, not the kind written in notebooks, but the kind written in the soul. He closed his eyes, whispered to himself, "Just be real," and went to sleep. The White House speech. The next morning, the auditorium was filled: educators, officials, journalists, and students. The U.S. flag stood tall behind the podium. Cameras were everywhere. When Ethan's name was called, he walked up calmly, no notes, no teleprompter, just his heart. He looked at the crowd and began, "When I was 16, I couldn't even introduce myself without shaking. I thought communication was about sounding smart, but I've learned it's about being honest. I thought speaking was about being perfect, but it's really about being human." He told them about Riverdale High, about the shy girl who spoke for the first time, about David's lessons, and about the power of listening. Then he ended with this: if we want a generation that speaks with strength, we must first teach them to listen with compassion. Because great communication isn't taught in classrooms, it's built in conversations. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is, "I understand you." The entire hall stood up in applause. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, but Ethan didn't care about the attention. He looked up for a moment as if speaking to David and whispered, "We did it." Full circle. After the event, Ethan walked outside. The sky was clear, the air cool. He sat on a bench overlooking the Washington Monument, closed his eyes, and smiled. He thought about the boy he used to be, afraid, quiet, lost, and the man he had become, still humble, but unafraid to speak truth. He realized that communication had never been just a skill. It was a mirror reflecting who he was becoming with every word he chose. Maya joined him on the bench. "You were incredible," she said softly. He smiled. "I didn't give a speech. I just told the truth." She leaned her head on his shoulder. And that's why people listened. Reflection. That night, back in his hotel room, Ethan wrote in his journal, the same one David had given him years ago. He wrote, "Communication isn't the art of talking. It's the courage to be seen. It's the honesty to be real. And it's the compassion to help others speak when they can't." He closed the notebook, turned off the light, and smiled in the dark, knowing that somewhere David was still listening. Part 3. The Turning Point. By the end of spring, Ethan had begun to notice a quiet change in himself. He was no longer terrified of speaking to people, but the fear hadn't vanished. It had simply learned to coexist with courage. Every time he felt his throat tighten before a meeting, he would whisper to himself, "Fear means growth." But progress wasn't linear. Life never allows it to be. The setback. The Chicago office announced that a senior communication manager position had opened, the very role Ethan had dreamed of since his early days in the company. He spent weeks preparing his presentation, revising every word, every slide, every potential question that could be asked. He rehearsed in front of mirrors, in his apartment, in elevators, even on the train. When the day came, he gave it everything he had. His voice didn't tremble. His ideas were sharp, his answers confident. The room nodded, smiled, even applauded. He left the meeting thinking he had nailed it. A week later, the email arrived. "We appreciate your effort and passion, but we've decided to go in another direction." Ethan just stared at the screen. His chest sank and his mind flooded with every old thought he tried to bury. "You're not good enough. They saw through you. You're still that shy kid pretending to be confident." He didn't go to work the next day. He walked along the shores of Lake Michigan, hands in his pockets, watching the cold waves crash. When he finally called Ms. Garcia, his mentor, she said softly, "So you lost a job title, not your voice. What did you learn?" He wanted to say nothing, but deep down he knew the truth. He had learned that communication isn't about perfection, it's about connection. He realized that even though he didn't win, he had been heard. For the first time in his life, people had really listened to him. That night, he opened his journal and wrote, "If I can make one person understand me, truly understand me, I've already improved." The mentor's lesson. Weeks later, Miss Garcia invited Ethan to join her at a youth leadership workshop in Los Angeles. "You'll be one of the speakers," she said. Ethan almost laughed. "A speaker? Me? You've got to be kidding." But she wasn't. This isn't about perfection. It's about helping others who were once you. He hesitated for days before agreeing. When he landed in LA, he was overwhelmed by the city's energy, sunshine, billboards, endless motion. The event was held at a community center filled with high school students and college kids who looked anxious, hopeful just like he once was. When it was his turn to speak, His hands trembled, but he remembered what he had promised himself. Fear means growth. He took a breath and began, I used to be afraid to speak, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't believe my words mattered. The room went silent. Dozens of eyes locked on him. He told them about rejection, loneliness, and the long journey of learning to connect. He didn't quote textbooks or give formal advice. He simply spoke from the raw center of his heart. And by the time he finished, the students stood up and clapped not out of politeness, but connection. Afterward, a girl approached him with tears in her eyes. You just told my story, she said. That one sentence broke him open. For the first time, Ethan understood that communication wasn't a skill you mastered for career advancement. It was a bridge built from one soul to another. The reunion back in Chicago, Ethan found himself reconnecting with old friends he had lost touch with. Among them was Sarah, the friend he had avoided years ago because he feared awkward silences. They met at a quiet cafe downtown. She had become a social worker, radiant with warmth and purpose. So, she said, smiling, you're a motivational speaker now? He laughed. Barely. I'm still figuring it out. Their conversation flowed easily, and for the first time, Ethan wasn't overthinking every word. He asked questions, really listened, and felt the rhythm of connection returning to his life. Before they left, Sarah said something that stayed with him. You always had something to say, Ethan. You just needed to believe people wanted to hear it. That night, he realized that his growth wasn't just about public speaking or business communication. It was about human communication, the art of being real, listening, and letting people see the person behind the words. Building bridges. Over the next few months, Ethan began volunteering at local community centers, teaching teens how to express themselves, how to make eye contact, speak clearly, and tell their stories with pride. He discovered something powerful. Every person he helped taught him something too. The shy boy with a stutter reminded him of his own fear. The confident girl who hid behind sarcasm reminded him that humor can mask insecurity. The quiet artist who spoke through drawings reminded him that communication isn't always verbal. He began writing articles online, not for fame, but to share his journey. His posts about overcoming fear, rejection, and loneliness started gaining attention. People commented from all over the country, saying, this is exactly what I needed. One message stood out. I watched your talk in LSA on YouTube. You made me believe I could speak again. That night, Ethan cried. It wasn't sadness, it was gratitude. Because for the first time, he wasn't trying to prove anything. He was serving something bigger, the universal desire to be understood. The big moment. Months later, his company invited him to deliver a keynote speech at their annual conference in New York. Thousands of employees would be attending. Cameras, reporters, CEOs. He stood backstage, looking out at the bright lights and giant screens. The nervousness returned, but it felt different now. It wasn't fear of failure. It was respect for the moment. When his name was called, Ethan walked to the podium. He didn't start with data or quotes. Instead, he said quietly, 5 years ago, I couldn't order coffee without panicking. Today, I'm standing here because I learned that communication isn't about talking, it's about connecting. He shared stories, not statistics. He spoke about rejection, about Ms. Garcia, about the students in Los Angeles. He ended with a message that made the entire auditorium stand still. We live in a world full of noise, but the real power is in understanding. The more you listen, the more you speak from truth, the stronger your voice becomes. When he finished, there was a silence, then an eruption of applause that shook the hall. Backstage, Miss Garcia hugged him tightly. You found your voice, she said. Ethan smiled. I think it was there all along. I just stopped hiding from it. Part 4, Finding the Voice within the New York conference had changed everything. Ethan's name was suddenly known throughout the company, not because he was the loudest voice in the room, but because he was the most genuine. His talk wasn't about impressing others, it was about connecting, and people felt that truth. In the weeks that followed, his inbox filled with invitations from universities, podcasts, small business panels. For a moment, Ethan felt the rush of validation he had once dreamed about. The same boy who once avoided eye contact was now being asked to teach others how to speak with confidence. But deep inside, he knew something. He hadn't mastered communication. He was still mastering himself. The letter one evening, while going through old things, Ethan found a letter in his drawer yellowed, folded, and half torn. It was something he had written years ago during the darkest point of his life, when he couldn't even introduce himself without fear. The first line read, "If I could just learn how to talk like everyone else, maybe I'd finally belong." He stared at those words for a long time. He didn't feel shame. He felt compassion. He realized that communication isn't about becoming like everyone else. It's about finding your way to share your truth. Every stutter, every pause, every trembling moment was part of that truth. That night, he decided to write another letter not to his past self, but to anyone who felt the same pain he once did. He wrote, "You don't need to speak perfectly. You just need to speak honestly. Because the world doesn't need more perfect voices, it needs real ones." He posted the letter online. Within hours, it went viral. Comments poured in from across America, teachers, students, veterans, parents. People shared their stories of fear, failure, and courage. Ethan didn't just start a conversation. He started a movement. The mentor's goodbye. A few weeks later, Miss Garcia called. Her voice was warm, but quieter than usual. "I'm retiring, Ethan," she said. "It's time for me to step back. But before I do, I want you to take my place in the program. You'll be mentoring the next generation." Ethan was silent. He remembered the nervous kid who had sat in her classroom years ago, unable to even raise his hand. "You believe I can?" he asked softly. "I don't believe it," she replied. "I've seen it." When he hung up, he sat alone in his apartment for a long time, staring out at the Chicago skyline. The nightlights shimmered across the city, every window a story, every street a memory. He realized how far he had come, not in miles, but in mindset. The next chapter. Ethan began mentoring young professionals, coaching them on public speaking, storytelling, and authentic communication. But instead of teaching them tricks or techniques, he taught them truth. He'd say, "Don't try to sound confident. Try to sound real. Don't memorize, understand. Don't talk to impress. Talk to connect." People responded to his honesty. They felt safe being imperfect around him because he had walked that same path. One student, a shy engineer named Marcus, reminded him of himself. Marcus barely spoke during their first few sessions. But Ethan didn't rush him. He gave him space the same way Ms. Garcia once gave him space. One day, Marcus finally spoke up during a team presentation, voice trembling, but steady. Afterward, he ran up to Ethan and said, "I did it. My voice didn't crack this time." Ethan smiled. "It doesn't matter if it cracks. It matters that it came from your heart." In that moment, Ethan realized he had officially become the kind of mentor he once needed. A voice for other. Months later, Ethan received an invitation to deliver a TEDx talk in San Francisco. The title they suggested was "The Power of Being Understood." It felt poetic, like life was giving him one final test, a full circle moment. He accepted. The day of the talk, the red circle on the stage seemed smaller than he imagined, but the audience looked endless. The lights were bright, but he wasn't nervous anymore. He looked at the crowd, people of all ages, colors, accents, and backgrounds, and said, "When I was younger, I thought communication was about saying the right words. But now I know it's about saying what's true." He spoke about fear, about Ms. Garcia, about Marcus, about that old letter that once begged to belong. He told the audience that every person, no matter how broken or quiet, has a voice that can move someone else. We spend our lives trying to be heard, he said, but the real magic begins when we start listening to ourselves and to others. When he finished, the applause wasn't thunderous, it was emotional. People stood, some wiping their eyes because they felt every word. The reunion speech. A year later, Ethan returned to his old high school in Ohio. The gym smelled the same, faintly of polish and teenage dreams. He was invited to give the commencement speech to the graduating class. As he walked up to the stage, he spotted Ms. Garcia sitting in the front row. Her hair was silver now, but her eyes still carried that same quiet fire. He took a deep breath and began. When I was your age, I couldn't even look people in the eye. I thought success belonged to those who were born confident. I was wrong. He told them that confidence isn't a gift, it's a habit. That communication isn't about being the loudest, it's about being the clearest. And that real strength comes from the courage to be seen, even when you feel invisible. Then he looked directly at the students and said, "One day you'll be in a room where your heart races, your palms sweat, and your voice shakes. Speak anyway, because someone in that room needs to hear your truth just like I needed to hear mine." The students cheered. Ms. Garcia smiled, tears welling in her eyes. Afterwards, she hugged him and whispered, "You've become everything you once dreamed of and more." Ethan smiled and said, "I just followed your example." The legacy over the next few years, Ethan's workshops spread across America from New York to Texas, from Los Angeles to Seattle. He helped entrepreneurs, teachers, immigrants, and students. His story inspired countless others to find their voice not by changing who they were, but by embracing who they'd always been. He began writing a book called The Quiet Voice That Changed Everything. It wasn't about fame or self-promotion. It was about giving hope to those who felt unseen. He wrote, "Every time you share your truth, no matter how softly, you remind someone else that they are not alone." The book became a quiet success. But to Ethan, the true reward wasn't the sales. It was the letters from readers across the country. "I finally spoke up at work. I called my parents and told them how I feel. I stopped being afraid of my own voice." Full circle, one late evening, Ethan returned to the same cafe where he had first met Sarah years ago. The lights were dim, jazz music played softly, and snow fell outside. Sarah was there, waiting, smiling as if nothing had changed, and yet everything had. "I read your book," she said. "It made me cry." Ethan smiled. "That's how I know it worked." They talked for hours about life, about communication, about the strange way growth never really ends. At one point, she asked, "Do you ever miss the old you?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he said, "because without him, I wouldn't have learned to listen." Outside, the city lights shimmered on the snow. Inside, silence sat comfortably between them. Not awkward, but peaceful. It was the kind of silence that needed no words at all. Final message. Years later, when people would ask Ethan how to improve communication skills, he would always give the same answer: short, simple, and true. Start by listening, really listening. Speak only when your heart is in your words, and never confuse volume with value. He would smile and add, "You don't find your voice overnight. You build it one honest conversation at a time." Epilogue. On a quiet morning, Ethan received a handwritten note in the mail. The return address said Los Angeles, CA. It was from one of the students he had spoken to years ago. The letter read, "Dear Ethan, you said that if we could make one person understand us, we've already improved. I just wanted you to know I understand you, and because of you, I'm not afraid to speak anymore." Ethan folded the letter gently, smiling as he looked out at the morning light. The city buzzed below, filled with voices, laughter, and life. He whispered to himself, "That's what communication really is, the bridge between hearts." And with that, he picked up his pen and began writing again, not to be heard, but to keep connecting. Don't be silent when the world needs your story. Your voice has the power to move mountains if you're brave enough to use it. And here is the end of our today's motivational video, how to improve communication skills. If you like this video, please make sure to subscribe my channel. Goodbye, friends, and see you soon in another video.